Geek GirlCon welcomes the women of Valve. On the top row, starting from the left, we have Casey, who is sitting with her 4-week-old baby in front of a mantle with a TV. Jennifer, coming at us from her living room with purple hair and glasses. And Sharon, who has chic rose gold headphones and a black v-neck t-shirt with a white collar. On the bottom row, starting from the left, is Christine, who is sitting next to a wall of posters, including one for Brutal Legend, and Kristen, wearing a white sweater and sitting in front of a bright window seat. Thank you to these wonderful contributors. Take it away.
Hello, my name is Casey Aitchison Boyle, and I am here with my 4-week-old daughter, Quinn. But more importantly, I am here with some of the amazingly talented women of Valve, and we are really excited to have a bit of a conversation that we can share with people about everything that goes on at Valve and what we do and why we're excited to connect with people about it. So I'd love to get a little bit of perspective from each of the women on the panel, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and sharing a little bit of your work. Jennifer, let's start with you.
All right. Hi, I'm Jennifer. I work in IT. That's usually the best way to describe my position at Valve, because at Valve, we don't do titles, and everyone in IT kind of does everything that they're able to their expertise. And so for me, that can really change day to day between kind of like sysadmin and kind of day-to-day help desk stuff as well.
Yeah, Jennifer ordered us these really cool mechanical keyboards. So that's just one of the many amazing things.
They have been a bigger hit around the office than I was expecting.
Yeah, they're so sweet.
It started as like a conversation with, some of the other like mechanical keyboard nerds. It's one of those things I love about Valve is like, if you nerd about something, there's probably a nerd at Valve who also nerds about it.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I started talking to some people and they're like, yeah, I'm really interested in this keyboard. I'm like, hey, let me order a couple and let's like test them out and see what we think. And then a bunch of people were like, hey, I saw so-and-so had one of those keyboards. I want one. I'm like, okay, I'll just order some more so other people can have them. Before long, like the office is just canvassed with mechanical keyboards as everyone's throwing away their like old worn out ones they've been typing on 15 years. So
yeah, I'd always kind of wrinkled my nose at mechanical keyboards, but now that I've gotten to try one, like I'm a total
another convert.
So comfortable.
Christine, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure.
Great.
So my name's Christine Phelan. I'm an animator at Valve, and I've worked with Valve for 10 years. Most recently, project I worked on, it was Half-Life Alyx, doing a bunch of the creature work. I think I've been in the games industry for a grand total of like 13, 14 years. I started at LucasArts, worked at Double Fine for a while, and then I came to Valve in 2011.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Kristen, what about you?
Yeah, I've been at Valve for over 12 years, and I got my start designing software. I studied graphic design at the university where the first web browser was developed. And so I had an opportunity to study web design as it was in its infancy. And ever since then, I've been designing software. I mostly work on Steam at Valve, though I also worked on Portal 2. So we do everything from figuring out, should we do this? How should it work? All the way through to writing the press release about it and all the design work that goes on in between.
Great. All right, Sharon, last but not least.
I'm Sharon, and I've been at Valve for almost 6 years. I think my 6th year is coming up in a month or two. And I've been in the game industry for probably 7 or 8 years. I started off at ArenaNet, and prior to that, I studied at RISD, which is Rhode Island School of Design. I mainly focus on localization right now at Valve, although you don't really have a title and you do a lot of different things type of thing. So like I do everything from, working with my team to, get localization for all of our products out. But I also do things like work on the foreign production for TI, the International every year, which is our big Dota 2 tournament. So it's been a very interesting experience working on a breadth of things since I joined Valve.
Yeah, Sharon also helps us on Steam with sourcing artists for some of our events. It's pretty cool. Like there's kind of nothing that we won't do, right? Like
that's the art background. Mom, I'm using my degree. I told you.
Yeah, right. I mean, we really just see like if there's a need for something and we can identify that and identify that our skills are a match for it, we go for it. So very cool.
Something that each of you brought up as you were introducing yourself is kind of the basis for my next question, which is everybody at Valve, we all have our area of expertise, but then we all have these other amazing things that we have background in. And all of that seems to inform the way that we work with each other. It's such a collaborative environment, right?
Mhm.
So I'd love to hear from each of you. What about your background and what about your personal interest drives your interest in gaming and entertainment? And how did that bring you to Valve? Because when I first started, not quite a year ago, I know all of you for your talents. And then I would hear random things about these other things that you do on the side that seemingly are not at all related to what you do, but then they end up being related, like they inform some of the decisions that you make. So I'm fascinated by it. So I'd love to hear more about that.
We had a really fun design meeting with all the designers at Valve recently, where we just spent the entire hour showing one another the things that we do in our spare time, like as makers. And it was one of the more fun meetings that I've had with the group, because we really just got to know one another so well through our interests. For me, that's metalsmithing. So I do a lot of jewelry work, and boy, I don't know if I can make the connection back to what I do for Valve, but certainly, when it comes to things like fit and finish, which is the phrase we use when we're talking about sort of pixel level perfection in something, boy, melting metal into place or hammering it in place, that's all about fit and finish. So, my craftsmanship is something that shows up in both places for sure.
I had no idea that you had that background.
Well, I mean, it's just one of my hobbies that I've kind of developed over the years. And yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Really interesting too, because I feel like a lot of the work that we do is so much in like the digital space. And it's really nice to have that kind of like physical manifestation of art and craft and getting to just work with your hands.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I can talk a bit about the work that I do. So by day, I do work as an animator at Valve, which is very like deeply integrated into the gameplay teams in terms of like working to create whether it's character design or gameplay design. But in addition to that, I have a background in wildlife tracking and trailing and doing a bunch of work in kind of an ecological space. So studying predator-prey interactions, whether it's doing like actual statistics to look at the kind of high level view of how species interact with each other in the landscape, or actually on the ground tracking and trailing wildlife. How do I then integrate that kind of communication back into the work that I do? Because animation in particular is all about like, am I properly communicating this creature's state of mind, how it's feeling, what its goals and intentions are, and then making sure that that reflects back to the player. And also, I just really love creature animation. And so the more exposure to that I have, the better I am at communicating that stuff through motion.
I really love that about you. I think it's so fascinating. I love animals and nature. So like hearing about the work that you do, that's really neat. I actually had no idea that this was done outside of sort of like park ranger, scientific, like professor space. I didn't realize that there were volunteers like yourself who are going out, just people who have day jobs basically and doing this work. That's just really cool.
Yeah, some projects have been in support of like university, like PhD candidates and their broader projects. But then there's also a number in Washington State in particular that do citizen science. And so they're basically working with people who have varying degrees of experience with that kind of work, whether it's somebody who's like been doing it for years at this point, or like I've led groups where I'll take out just general public, like not to do mountain lion stuff, but
oh, more, come on.
But for some Wolverine stuff where there's opportunities to kind of teach just as much as it is about like getting out to go and do cool stuff. It's also like educating people about those sorts of like ecological issues and just giving people an opportunity to have a kind of more of a relationship with those landscapes and that those like our neighbors, basically our wild neighbors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's super cool that like our hobbies and what we do outside of work really kind of feedback and inform our work and like what we do and what we can bring our like expertise to. I never really thought like language, like anything with language was going to be my thing, but really growing up I really should have, because I was that weird kid who loved going to like Saturday school for Chinese school, and it was like a thing that like all the kids do, like when you grow up in like as a Chinese American, it's just like a typical shared experience. Like, oh, we have to go to Chinese school on Saturdays. And like, I really loved it. And that's kind of like why I continue to consume media from, Asia, even when I moved back to the US. English is actually technically not my first language. And then that kind of like fed back into it. And I just think it's really interesting how what you think you're going to do and what you think you're going to bring to the table is just wildly different than what you actually do in practice in the work environment.
Boy, there's so many different things that we get to spend our time doing, depending on kind of where we're at in the product cycle. And I'm sure that's true for others of you as well. I know that, the early stages of, say, like sketching out an idea is a very different task as compared to like jumping in and helping out with production and writing the front end code of some software, or designing the communications that we speak to customers about it with is another step. And I find that because we have such breadth in the work that we do, it just never gets old. You don't burn out because you're constantly moving on to a new set of tasks and skills in a way that keeps work really fresh and interesting.
I mean, on that note, like Casey, your path to Valve and like what brought you here at Valve is like really interesting and really different from the rest of us. I really want to hear you talk. Tell us about it.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because my background is almost entirely in broadcasting and communication. I spent 10 years in radio working on a morning show, and then 10 years in local TV news as an anchor and a host. And then my path to the gaming industry really came by accident. I auditioned to be a host at TI, which is something that Sharon was talking about earlier. And it was interesting because I showed up at the audition at Valve and they were like asking me questions. And I said, well, my gaming background is Super Mario Brothers as a kid. Like, I don't know much at this point. This was 10 years ago. And they said, well, no, that's what we want. We want somebody with a different perspective. And so that was my first exposure to Valve being the kind of company that isn't looking for something that might seem obvious, I guess, when it comes to experience. And so I found it really fascinating. And I was able to use my background in radio and TV to interview people and try to get their best stories out. And these were people in the gaming industry that I didn't have a lot of familiarity with, but I learned a lot.
Yeah, I remember the first TI that you hosted, and boy, you really made the game so accessible to so many of us who find it
warm.
Kind of difficult to bust into.
It's fun. And I think what's been nice since I joined full time is noticing that what I seem to have in common with everybody at Valve is this curiosity for things. Because when I first joined, I thought, gosh, I don't know if any of you guys feel this way. And I do want to ask a little bit about imposter syndrome, which is stereotypically can be a predominantly female trait. I know men feel it often too. But I have always felt it in my career because TV and radio were also male dominated. And I especially felt it when I started at Valve because I felt like I was surrounded by all of these amazingly talented people in like everything that you all do. I listen to the things that you talk about with your resume. And I'm like, I'm surrounded by the smartest people ever. And yet I realized the one thing I have in common with all of you is this curiosity and this willingness to find creative solutions to problems. And I'm hoping I'm not the only person that feels that way, but I would love to hear from each of you if you have felt similarly about, because when you're, especially as a woman in a male dominated industry, which we know tech is, I sometimes have found that to be a challenge, and I've overcome it sometimes by finding the similarities and the curiosity part. I would love to hear if that's similar for any of you or if it's completely different.
It's very much like any design task where, if you're not an expert in an area already, you're going to become one before, you're through with the project. And that does require a ton of curiosity and a willingness to show up in a way that may, reveal that you're learning. And I think that for me, it's been really helpful to just remember the question, help me understand. And you find that forcing a conversation about like, what are we exactly trying to accomplish here? What are our goals? What does success look like? You're encouraging the entire group to actually communicate those things with one another in a way that makes them accessible to everyone. So that's very common to the way
I
we
love
work.
that. Help me understand. I actually wrote that down when you said it. I thought that's such a great way to approach something that you aren't. And like you said, like not being afraid to show that maybe you're still learning and you're not an expert on something yet.
And also, sometimes you can even use that to challenge someone's assumptions. You know, obviously, like our work is better when we collaborate with one another. And so, you know, by sort of saying like, wait a minute, I'm not so sure. I think that's the best solution. Help me understand why you think it is. We can really dig into alternatives and come to a shared understanding of whether something is the right approach.
One of my favorite parts of the work that we get to do here is that it is a never-ending learning opportunity. Like there is such a diversity, like we were talking about earlier, a diversity of skills and backgrounds and experiences. And I think there's like with every single person I've ever worked with at the company, I've always learned something from them. And that has kept me energized and excited because I know that no matter what task I'm working on, I'm always going to leave it with something more at the end of it.
I think just our unique approach to, like the way we're structured and the way we like collaborate with each other, it gives us a lot more exposure than I've ever had with different disciplines and different people with different backgrounds and what they do. And in the process over the years, you just like, you pick up and learn, you learn so many things doing that, right? When I first started helping on TI, I just came in to help with like, I think it was just like to wrangle people or something like, it was just logistics. And then it just kind of grew over the years. You just notice a problem. You're like, oh, there's something to work on. There's something that needs, a solution. And then you pick at it, and then eventually you realize, oh, like I'm helping with production, and I have no production background, right? So that's an interesting position to be in, because you go in, you're like, oh, I don't know anything here. Do I belong here? Should I work on this? I don't know how to play Dota. I didn't start playing Dota until 2016, I think it was 2016, like during Manila Major. It was like during one of the events after my first 1 or 2 TI that I just finally started playing Dota, because I just needed to understand what I was like watching. And I felt really uncomfortable at first. Like being in that space and like trying to learn and pick up all these things that I felt everybody around me like just understood really well and were like really good at everything they do. But here I am 5 years later, just still learning, but also like feeling like I'm contributing for sure to the process and the product.
Yeah, the freedom to identify and solve a problem. And having that capacity here is like really empowering.
I personally feel like the idea of imposter syndrome is just something that I've been battling through like my whole life. It wasn't just Val that introduced it suddenly. It's something that it almost feels like every major step has been kind of trying to fight that and say, I deserve to be within this space. Like even, when I was younger, just kind of fighting for the right to call myself a gamer, and that's something that I identified myself as. And I think now it's definitely starting to become much more acceptable, I guess, for a woman to call themselves such, and they're not challenged as much. But certainly when I was really getting into gaming in like my 20s and such, it was very, very much like, if you were wearing a geek t-shirt, you would get challenged many times by men who are like, well, do you deserve to be in this space? Do you know what you're talking about? Are you just trying to be cute? And so, I mean, fighting imposter syndrome from I think all directions is a challenge that I've personally faced. And coming to Valve, I think is kind of reaffirming in multiple directions in my life, in terms of both kind of professionally as well as just kind of reaffirming my own identity as a geek, to be surrounded by other geeks and to be in a company that very much is part of geek culture.
One of the things that comes to mind for me when I think of imposter syndrome is the perspective that I was able to take, I think maybe straight out of school, when I was so excited to have my first job is that when you interview for a position, you are interviewing the employer as much as they're interviewing you. And, when even throughout my career, having a job, being able to kind of reaffirm that I choose this job on a regular basis has been important too.
Mm-hmm.
And just recognizing that when you're able to take that perspective, it is empowering to understand that, there's a unique perspective that you can bring to this industry as a woman, and that has real value. The more that we're able to bring that perspective to the products that we build, the more accessible they become to people like us. And so I think that's why it's so important to do the playtesting work that we do with a variety of folks, so that we can be sure and understand our products from many different angles that we can't possibly see from our own. And I think that women can lend quite a lot to that in the gaming space.
Right. And imposter syndrome comes and goes in cycles. I think it's something like we just like, you get through, I feel like sometimes I feel really empowered and sometimes I don't. And then like during those times I don't, I just work on trying to get through it so that I can, continue to do the work that I do and like create space for myself and for the people around me to do that.
When you find yourself in a position of kind of stuck in that vortex, like what are some of the things that you do?
Actually connecting with folks that I don't normally get to on a regular basis and just hearing their perspectives on our products and on, the gaming industry or whatever it is. It might not even be that. It might just be like our hobbies, right? Like learning what's out there out of my little bubble that sometimes I can get myself into because I'm so heads down on whatever I'm doing is just really refreshing. And it's like, and it's really motivating. Christine and I actually connected fairly recently, I think, after having sat fairly near each other for quite a while and not having the opportunity to collaborate directly on work. So therefore, not conversing as much in that aspect. And in after COVID, one day we just started chatting over chat and we were talking about a bunch of things. And I was like, wow, that was really invigorating, right? That was really motivating. And I remember at that time, I was kind of in a lull. I mean, it's a pandemic, right? So, and I was feeling really disconnected from the rest of the company for a little while there. It felt like we were just kind of churning along and trying to figure things out as we go, for me at least. And speaking with a couple of folks like Christine, that was really awesome. And that really made my week and just kind of was a really great pick me up.
Yay. Yeah, I think one of the things I try to do is, it's really similar to what you're saying, Sharon, is check in with people who maybe might not be in my immediate circle for things, just to get some additional perspective, right? Because I think the thing that I tend to forget when I'm stuck in my swirl is I'm not the only person who's also struggling with that stuff. And so that solidarity of, everybody has these struggles and everybody has these moments where they're doubtful or they're uncertain of where to go next or how to address what's in front of them. I think it's really great to look for those other perspectives. That's exactly why I talked to you, because I was I need advice and I know that I have this bucket right here that's full of the things that I'm accustomed to, and I wanted to work with you more. So
happy. Yay, feel good moment on camera.
Yeah, definitely. I think that whenever I'm designing a particular feature for Steam or something like that, I look to, of course, our user base for feedback on that. But sometimes, we're working on it and it hasn't hit the real world yet. And so you need to start a little smaller by just gathering feedback from one another. One of the most recent things that I've been working on is Steam chat and how we're now able to filter some of the language from chat that is either profane or in some way hurtful, like a slur of some sort. As we were kind of formulating our approach to this, it was really valuable to have feedback from others around the company.
Mm-hmm.
Another kind of feedback and seeking out kind of perspectives and experiences of people around you. It's a little bit more physical, but for Half-Life Alyx, a lot of the puzzle design that we were doing was very much like in the physical space that you're in and occupying. And I'm 5'2", so I'm not very tall. And some of our level designers are well over 6 feet. Having to actually playtest things, there were elements of the game where I could not actually finish the puzzle because I was too short. It's just as important to like get those kinds of experiences and perspectives from all different sorts of people. Just because like I literally can't see the thing or I can't reach the thing that's being created for our customers, and there will be customers who are smaller or younger, and so I think like that's also super important too.
I seem to recall honestly giving the same height feedback as well.
Yeah.
Like I was like, I distinctly recall like opening up like one of those file cabinets, the high ones, and be like, it's just like real life. I can't see the top drawer.
Yeah.
That's actually interesting because that leads into what I was going to ask a little bit, which is the idea of perspective and why it's important to have so many different perspectives in really any industry. But I'd love to hear from you why you think that's especially important in the world of tech.
I mean, it's universal, right?
And we're designing for all users and all people.
Yeah, all users and all people. You know, Steam's comprised of a lot of users from all over the world, all different kinds of backgrounds, who play all different kinds of games because our repertoire of, you know, available games is just so wide, right? And so like, how do you serve as well as you can to everybody that you know engages with our platform and our products? So yeah.
You know, our process is just beginning as soon as we're able to involve users, and playtesting is at the heart of that. And, you know, sometimes it means shipping a beta of a feature. So certainly just working with the community to understand, you know, what is it about this feature that you would like to see change before we call it good, or as we continue to refine it over time.
I had a really similar experience with hardware, our hardware development cycle, as Christine mentioned, with the height thing, with the VR, which for me, I have tiny hands. I have really tiny hands. And I remember like the initial iterations, I was like, oh, I can't actually like comfortably grip around. But you need people to play test. Like it's just things you don't think about when you're like designing. So like, yeah, like I can hold it. It's like, I can do this. I can see this. I can understand this. But you just, sometimes there are shoes you just never thought that you never thought about walking in. And getting that perspective is super, super valuable in my opinion.
One of the things I've always appreciated about our design process has been that kind of humility with, we have an idea, but ultimately the burden of proof rests with what users and players like come away with and how they respond and what their expectations are and how we set that for them. It's kind of iterative process that we have where we ship and react, I think is kind of the best way to really understand the people that you're building something for, because it requires you to go into that process with an open mind and being prepared to listen to what they have to say.
You can't really imagine what the VR experience is like until you've given it a try for yourself. It's that unique. We had a really interesting challenge when we launched the Vive with HTC. We realized we needed a way to allow people to try it for themselves. And so we partnered up with GameStop, and we would go to the GameStop every week with a new build of our software for retail demos. And we had the goal of being able to support customers. They walk into the store, they can get themselves into the hardware and trying out a series of 3 different titles of their choosing. And all of that needed to be done without our assistance because we weren't going to be there once the thing was done. At some point, we were able to kind of pretend like we were just shoppers and just watch from afar and see like, oh, they're misunderstanding this part, or look, the audio isn't working again. Can they tell which way the voice is coming from in order to face forward and be in the right position for the next experience? Those kinds of things. Yeah, so it's very humiliating. Playtesting, your assumptions are all just thrown out the window, and you have to go back to square one even sometimes. And you need the power of users to help you understand.
Yeah, and it's a brutal honesty that like, this did not work. So let's pick apart how it did not work.
And the fun thing about that process is that you don't have to have like an opportunity like we do with Steam, say, with millions of users around the world, you can start small.
Yeah. Speaking of Steam, I mean, we're still constantly learning and iterating on that front in a lot of different ways that you can't really even like you don't really think about because you're just so used to engaging with it in a certain way. Like one of the first big conversations I had that was part of when I first started here was just about like payment methods, and that's not something, we're so used to just like swipe a credit card or use PayPal or whatever. And this was like 5 or 6 years ago. And I remember explaining mobile payments to developers, and they're like, so they use a QR code. Why would they use their phone? And I'm like, well, everybody in China does it, right? Right? Like, there's like a 97% plus smartphone usage back then, even, all ages. Your grannies in the markets, they use, they used to use their phone to take payments. And it's not a concept that's like really common here in the US. More so now, I think, with Google Pay and Apple Pay and all that, but like it was already just set there, just everything was tied together. And that's just like a very unique experience that, if you only stay within the bubble of like, being in the US, living in the US and not traveling, you don't really even think about how different people from different countries and different regions engage with payment methods very, very differently, like Japan still has a very big like cash culture, right? We have so now since then we've included so many more different types of payment methods, different types of cards. And it's like really cool to see that growth in like making that part of the process, like engaging with the platform, easier and more accessible to people in ways that, they're used to, not just that we're used to in the US and how we engage with that, right? So there's a lot of there's a lot of little things like that too that are really actually big when you think about it more.
How are you all able to toe that line between confidence and humility?
I mean, you can actually find yourself being pretty manic throughout the design process, honestly. Like, I've got this. I'm going to get it out there. It's going to be awesome. And then like, oh man, that did not go the way I thought it would. It's basically like, well, what did I learn from that mistake? Let me make a list of things that I heard, solve for each of those. Now I've got solutions that address them. Now I'm confident and, just got to jump back in there with what you've got.
I think it's operating with the recognition that you are making something for someone.
Right.
I'm not making it for me. I might enjoy the thing that I'm doing and I may enjoy the end product, but ultimately, so long as you're ensuring that your decision-making is guided by the fact that you are making this for someone else to consume, I think that
that's
you
the
much
essence
more
of
it.
game design and product design. It's while you may be an artist, the project is not an art per se, right? Like whereas art is about expressing yourself creatively, design is much more about like, do I have a problem that I'm solving or a goal that I'm trying to achieve, and how will I know when I've done it? And defining all those things in order to give yourself what we call constraints, to a problem. So boy, if you can really leverage constraints to your advantage, let's see, back to my example of a map, like maybe that you've only got a black and white printer for your map. Well, you're not going to be able to use color. Well, that simplifies the problem so much now. You don't have to worry about what color is going to communicate, right? Now it's all black and white. That's an example of kind of leveraging constraints to your advantage. And you have to find those in order to kind of carve out a little space where you can do your work and scope it in order to be able to achieve what you're trying to accomplish.
I feel like going back even a little bit further before I even started working in the game industry, right? Like talking about confidence and humility and like learning the balance. I really liked playing team-based games when I was a teenager growing up. And that's kind of the space where I learned that like you kind of have to carve out something for yourself because, you have to communicate, you have to succeed together. And like, if you don't speak up, you get lost, right? And so that's kind of where like I learned as a consumer, because of consumer of games, like what it was like to not feel comfortable doing certain things, or what it's like to not feel like there's quality product that serve my needs, and like just remembering that experience going back, right? And now being in a space where I'm like, I can kind of help change that. So that history, even just going back before I even started working, was really informative in teaching me how to be more confident. I struggle more with the confident part of it. But yeah, Jennifer, I don't know if you feel the same way.
Well, you're talking about like confidence, like within the game community, like I was talking about before.
Yeah,
I mean,
and how it like relates to work too, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. There's definitely two different conversations I could just really go off on about here about confidence in, what I spoke about being imposter syndrome, even within kind of the geek and gamer culture. And it's maybe something that has developed within myself that I do sometimes feel imposter syndrome because frankly, I'm getting old and I'm a professional and I don't always play games, and I'll identify as a gamer, but I might go a few weeks without playing a game because I'm busy. Like life happens, and like, can I still identify as a gamer if I didn't play any games for the last few weeks? As well as kind of that imposed imposter syndrome where you're told that you're an imposter. Like it's not even just like that internalized thing. It's like it's external forces that tell you you don't belong here. And I could just go on a whole conversation about, the culture of that. But I think I would rather maybe pivot back to the more professional side of it, in terms of like in my space of being in IT and kind of the confidence of knowing the correct answer. I guess when you're in IT, you're kind of like the expert of the things that people touch and use every single day. So it sometimes can be a mix of being both a new person, but also you're a woman. And I think there still is very much that stereotype of women don't know about these computer things as much as like the guys do. So maybe go ask a guy, like don't ask the woman like how to fix the computer thing. And so
Yikes.
Yeah, being the resident expert on the computer things, and then being confident to tell someone, actually, this is what you want to do. It's a balance too. It's definitely the balance of humility and confidence in terms of, I guess it's kind of the art of being a woman, is knowing how to break it to someone. Like how to phrase things, I guess, like in a way that comes across both in an understanding and humanizing way for all audiences. And in a way, it's also kind of the superpower, I think, of being a woman, in that I have this ability within IT to be someone who can talk to a wider range of people without sounding kind of like an ass. Because I think that's also another stereotype of IT, is the help desk people are kind of an ass. And they're very direct, and they talk down to you, and they're demeaning. And so kind of being a woman, I think you're much more, at least I am, a lot more empathetic to other people's perspectives and the wide range of kind of technical knowledge, knowing that there's going to be people who basically you just have to name the thing that they have to click on. Like, I know exactly how to get there. I will just go click on the thing. But then other people are like, what the heck is that? And they need step by step. And then once again, you're in that balance of like, it is that constant like play between it, because sometimes if you give someone step by step, they feel like you're talking down to them. Like, well, I know what that thing is. Why did you just treat me like I don't know? So.
Oh yeah, you have to deal with people when they're in their most vulnerable too, right? Like all of their emotions come out because they're frustrated, or they they've been trying to get something working for a while and failing. And so you have to really help them through that kind of emotional experience themselves too.
It can get very emotional. One thing that actually kind of frustrates me sometimes is I'll hear someone who's like, man, I've been struggling with this issue for days. And it's like, why didn't you tell me? I could have fixed this for you in 10 minutes. Why did you suffer for days? Just let me know. Maybe it's just kind of the stubbornness as well that, that confidence of like, no, I can fix this on my own. I don't need to ask for directions.
Right. I don't need help.
I don't need help, It's
I am so not like that. Like the moment something is like not working, I'm like, Jennifer, IT.
I've kind of been in the position of being unwilling to ask for help though. Because I think that gets to imposter syndrome kind of on the other side of things where like, I feel like I should be able to do this on my own. Yeah. I should be able to fix this. I should be able to solve this problem. And it can be really challenging sometimes to ask for that help. And so like that is a degree of vulnerability that I think is difficult for me at times because I feel like I have to prove myself and computers are hard. And so I'm very,
appreciative. That happens to me daily as well, to be honest. Like, it's like, this is such an easy thing. Like, why can't I figure this out? I'm like the resident expert here. Like, it's a computer thing. Why can't I figure this out of all people? And definitely get that experience as well. So I'm absolutely not immune to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, you touched on something that I think I know that I've had this conversation with a lot of women in multiple industries, which is the worry about the tone, how I come across, and something that you brought up there. And I would love to hear a bit about how you have found this to be at Valve, because I know that my experience was surprisingly different. Where I'm worried about sounding like a bitch. I'm worried about sounding too direct, but then when I'm not too direct, people call me emotional. And so as an experiment, when I started at Valve, I started being more direct. And in my head, I was like, oh, they're going to all think I'm a bitch. They're going to think whatever. And I was really surprised by some of the reaction I got. I remember I was in one of my first meetings and I was very assertive about something to the point where, because it was the one thing I knew. I'm like, this is the one thing I know. And I wouldn't drop it. This is just the one. Wait, one of three things that I know. As I was asserting myself, that little voice was in my head going, oh, you might be pushing this too hard. Maybe you're being too direct. Maybe you shouldn't. And I went with my gut, which was, no, you know this. And these are people who hired you. And afterwards, I sent them all an email apologizing.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I was like, hey, guys, I know I really came off strong. And this was a room full of men at Valve. And every single one of them got back to me and they're like, what are you talking about? Like, you were asserting yourself. That's what we do here. Do any of you have similar experiences with that, about how that's been different or the same?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think meeting space is sort of where I'm like, do I speak up? How do I frame it? What if I come off as too strong? Or what if I'm wrong and I can't take it back? Which is wrong, which is a wrong, really like incorrect perspective to have, because I can always take it back if I'm actually wrong, right? But like that just goes through my head pretty often when I'm in a meeting space. And it's definitely a challenge to sometimes just be like, yes, like speak up. You need to make your voice heard. Some days I'm better about it than others. But yeah, I've definitely done similar things to kind of like accommodate. I'm like, should I send up a follow-up email? That goes through my head all the time. I super relate with what you talked about.
I write those emails, but then I don't send them. Like that gets it out of my system.
That's a good strategy.
Yeah. I love that.
So I get to maintain being assertive, and then I get to apologize to myself for.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. I find that I'll often just couch what I'm about to say, and maybe to a fault, but to be able to say, hey guys, I really I want to bring this up again because I know we've talked about it many times, and yet here I'm going to make us do it one more. Let's dig into this. Help me understand, calling attention to the fact that I'm aware that I'm beating this question to death, and I'm continuing to make us, ask it. I think that awareness and communicating it can be helpful. Yeah, but like you say, being direct is a huge part of our company culture, and I'm really thankful for that.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely drawn out of us. Like, I think it's kind of a
Right.
necessity of being a relatively small company with relatively small teams of people. Like, every opinion and every perspective does matter. And I would say every perspective and every opinion does wind up in our product in some form or another. Like, we're all valuable members of the team, no matter the role that we fill at the company.
Yeah.
One of the things I had to learn when I came to Valve was that it's expected that you are constantly eavesdropping.
Yeah. That's a good
And
way to
going,
put it.
all these habits that you're like, that might not be
Wait,
good.
I did not know that.
I'm gathering data.
Gathering data is
Yeah.
how we refer to it. But you actually go like, wait a minute, I hear something that's going on over here and I have opinions. And waltzing into that conversation and saying, wait, I think I have something to add to the, to the equation here.
I just love that about Valve too.
Yeah,
because
that is
I
expected.
just have to interject that this is the first job where I basically wasn't told mind your own business.
Oh wow!
Like
Stay in
that's
your
just been a
lane.
constant theme where I'll overhear something or I will see something wrong that's outside of my box of responsibilities, and I say something or I try to fix it, and I get like, no, that's not your job. Like you don't hear that at Valve. There is no, that's not your job. And
Right.
I mean, and it's just like that feeling inside of me of ever like hearing that again just makes my skin crawl, because I'm like, it doesn't need to work that way.
Yeah.
You don't
In
need
fact,
to
it
tell
works
people
that
that's
way.
not their job. If they know how to fix this and they see something wrong, they're just trying to make it better. Like people, they have the best intentions. And I think it's just born maybe of insecurity from some people. They're like, what, you're taking my job? And it's like, that's not what's going on.
That's actually why I joined Valve. I found that in my corporate job, I was really feeling pigeonholed into a role, and I had developed expertise in other roles just through collaboration with folks, and I was ready to apply that in ways that I think was really stepping on other folks' toes in that other context. And it was the sole reason, honestly, that I wanted to join Valve. I mean, there are so many, but that was the one that kind of was the impetus for me to join Valve, was the understanding that there is no boundary, there is no job description, there is no job title, and your limits are dictated by you in terms of how you choose to spend your time and how you choose to grow and assert yourself. And not many places can offer that kind of opportunity, but it certainly seems to be a really healthy way to work, and it would be great to see more teams start to work that way.
In addition to that, I think just as much as there's this flexibility for me to kind of actively insert myself into a conversation, I've also felt very much as though my opinion and perspective has been sought. And that's just a part of the company culture where there's been this, like, we understand that everybody around here has something else that they could bring to the conversation, or something that we might just be so heads down on this one thing that we're trying to solve that we're just not considering it. And so I think in having that kind of two-way street exist, I think I've felt very much more encouraged to speak up and participate and contribute in a variety of different ways.
Right. When people talk about inclusive environments, that's actually what I think of. Like, not just the idea that you exist there, that you're like part of that team, but also that your your insights, your opinions, your ideas, your thoughts are like sought after. That you are asked that question rather than you seeking to be the one to provide that. And that's just really valuable.
Yeah. And you don't get that for free though, right? Like, I think that you have to keep working. Every time you work with somebody new, you have to kind of educate them about your worth, right? Like, you have to show it to them. You have to demonstrate it and have them learn through experience that, you have an expertise that they can seek. You never just get that for free, no matter how many years you put into, a job or an effort. You're constantly, reminding people of that value and, through the work that you do.
Well, as we wrap up here, I'd love to get, if each of you have one final piece of advice that you would pass on to somebody, a woman just starting out in the tech industry, or somebody who's been working in it a while that is looking for some additional encouragement maybe, because I'm going to write some of it down too, because everything that you're all saying I'm finding really helpful for me too. Jennifer, we'll start with you. What would be the one piece of advice that you would leave?
Going back to the imposter syndrome and confidence is know that you know things and have confidence in that, and build on that. And it almost like can feel like it's holding you back if you're not having that confidence to say, I know what I know, and I know that this is a good fit, and just go for it. Like, have the confidence, because what's the worst that people can say when you're, starting out? They could just say no. And you're always going to miss those opportunities if you don't actually try. And it's hard to develop tough skin to be told no, but it's also even worse to realize, that you could have had a better opportunity if you just put yourself out there.
Great. Christine, what about you?
Jennifer said something that I think has been part of the way that I've tried to move through life, and it's to go for those opportunities. Like, don't wait for someone to give you permission to do a thing or to be in a place or to exist. And anytime an opportunity presents itself to you, I think it's worth saying yes to.
Kristen?
As you're working on your portfolio, I think having a project where you can say, I ran this by my audience and I learned something about how it wasn't quite right. And so I made this change and I learned that was better. Just define your audience for a particular problem and run it through that little loop of iteration. If you can tell that story when you're showing your work, it will make your work so much stronger. And you'll find that the work itself is way more rewarding because you've gained some insight that you didn't have already.
Love that. Sharon, what about you?
I will have to kind of combine a little bit about our topics about, learning, and also just the idea of like being perfect for something. Like, your failures and your successes are all equally important. And the important thing is to try and to learn from that experience and to use that experience to then, continue to grow. We all never stop learning just because we got to a job. We all never stop learning just because we attained our goal, role, or whatever it is. Constantly improving on yourself and constantly learning, and knowing that other people are too. It's just really good perspective to keep in, to kind of like ground you in that like balance between humility and confidence that we were talking about, for me.
I wish that as a culture, we were better about not looking at failure as an end. Like, I think you do way more learning when you have failed at something, and you grow way more when you have failed at something, because you've learned, like you're saying, Kristen, this is what I need to change now about the process that I'm going through. And so, I wish overall as humans, I wish we were gentler with ourselves with failure.
Yeah. Honestly, if someone even says that they're perfect, I would highly question their authenticity and genuineness. That's just confidence that's through the roof, because it's like, that's actually not possible. You need to like actually admit when you're wrong, because I think more than anything, it's a flaw if you think that you present something as being perfect and not a work in progress, because it means that you're not realizing where you're going wrong, and it's actually like badly flawed.
Life is a practice.
We are always learning from our customers. It's never ending.
Yeah.
And mine was just going to be kind of a combination of what you're saying. Don't ever put yourself into a box. There's no need to label your career or your expertise. I think sometimes we feel like we have to pick a lane and stay in that lane. And for me, I've learned over the years to just be willing to be surprised by what you can do, I guess. Like, just because you're an expert in something now doesn't mean you're not about to learn something and become an expert in the next year, 10 years, whatever.
Yeah, when I was in college, I was taught that you have 1,000 shitty drawings before you do even one really good one. And so you might as well just start getting those bad ones out of the way.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a delight. Thank you guys so much. I just really appreciate you all being so vulnerable and sharing everything. It's just been helpful. I feel more connected to the world now, actually, after talking to you.
Thank you, Casey. Thank you,
Casey.
everyone.